Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're back for one of my favorite shows of the year. In fact, two of them. So make sure you get both the offense and the defense version of this. But we're going to do our bye-week roster evaluation. And joining me for that, as always, is Brian McFarland. Brian, how you doing?
Good, Ken. How are you these days?
I can't complain, not one little bit. And certainly Ravens had a great bye week just now. Appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Our friends did us some favors. It always seems like end of the season, we don't get a lot of favors done for us. But it certainly happened this weekend for sure.
I mean, expecting winning teams to lose is generally kind of a fool's errand and a tough thing to happen on Sundays. But the Ravens literally had a 1:00 win and game go in their favor, a 4, an 8, and then an 8 on Monday as well. It's just perfectly time slotted for our viewing enjoyment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great thing when you come off of a couple of wins and your bye week. Of course, you come off a Thursday win; it gives you a really nice, fun weekend. Then you have another game, and you have your bye week, and you're sitting pretty at 9-3. It's you can just kind of sit back and enjoy and not get too worried about it. And then like I said, everybody did us favors too, so it gets even better.
I don't know about you. I really hate the bye week. Normally, if it's during the middle of the season, it's too. First of all, it's too long to go without football in the middle of the year for me. It's like, I want a Ravens game. I want to do some analysis. I want to go to the game, whatever it might be. But this, with all the stars aligned in the way they were this year, was perfect for it, and obviously great results.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so let's talk defense first. We'll go through the roster, and I'll remind people the way we divide up the roster here. So we've got 5 categories here. The young producers, those are players on their first contract, generally producing it at a level that's well above their cap value. So a lot of these guys are already starters, or they're very close to having that role, as you'll see as we go through this, and producing a value that's at a higher level than what their cap cost is. Then there's a very large set of developmental players, people we hope can join that young producer category. They're still in the first contract by and large. Some of them are kind of close to the end of it, and they're about to run out of time, but we'll talk through those guys individually when we get there. We have veterans playing for market value. So a lot of your cap is spent on that group. So we'll talk about those. We have veteran cap value concerns. Fortunately, the Ravens don't have a ton of those, but they have maybe a couple more than in typical years this year. And then they have transitional players who really probably will not be around. They aren't part of the 2024 plans already. I've included all the players that are on injured reserve, NFI, the practice squad, and the regular 53. I don't think I missed any lists there, did I?
Nope, that's it.
But let's start talking through this. And Brian, why don't you bring up a player you like from the young producer category and talk about him in terms of value relative to cap, because that's really what we're discussing today.
Yeah, well, and I meant to go back and look at last year's list, but I think it's thankfully, and it's a good thing, a lot of these guys were developmental last year, if I remember correctly. We weren't sure about them. Queen and Matabike were probably on the young producers, but Hamilton, Jones, Stevens, Owe, and Geno Stone. I mean, that's a great list. Obviously, the one thing that stands out about that list is the 3 free agents, and are they of the free agents they have coming into going into the off season, how are they going to be able to maneuver with those guys? And certainly Matabike has put himself in line for a huge payday. Queen certainly has put himself in for a very nice payday as well, and I think Stone has as well, but that Matabike could be looking at 15 to 20 million a year next year. I mean, what's he, 9.5 sacks? You get an interior guy with that many sacks, and he's obviously with 5 games to go still. So when I look at that list, I love those names, and you kind of wish you had with the 3 free agents, you had one more year to get out of them before free agency. But they're going to have some tough decisions to make this off season. And right there, those 3 guys, it's really, it's going to be really tough to keep. It'd certainly be tough to retain all 3, which I think is highly unlikely.
Yeah, and I would agree, but it's part of the curse of being a good drafting organization that you have to make these heartbreaking decisions, and you get compensated at least with draft picks. That's the comfort food you get in exchange for losing these young players. And Matthew Judon, was very salty about leaving the Ravens. Some players have not been. I think Patrick Queen sounded like early in the year he was more accepting about it. We've seen some interesting tweets recently from him about thinking that, what was it, 65 million or 67 million for 4 years is probably not enough.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. I mean, now the off-ball linebacker has increased. The value's increased over the last couple of years, partly thanks to the Ravens and Roquan Smith. But so I'm sure there'll be a market there, and obviously, but he did start taking off last year before Roquan arrived, and then certainly things really clicked after that. So whether they were going to click anyway, or whether having the Batman and Robin routine not being Batman and maybe being Robin in this case has benefited him. But it certainly reminds me, us old timers, reminds me of Ray and Bart Scott in the middle together in that 06 defense where Ray was holding down the run game, and Scott was going, I think Scott almost had 10 sacks that year, if I remember correctly. So that's kind of the same approach they seem to have now, and it's going to be a shame that it's only perhaps a year and a half worth of it.
One of the things that I always talk about on my show is that the Ravens are not tapping into value in terms of cap that they've done before, and that is to have a platoon at weak side linebacker. That they've done very well having players on their first contract on the weak side in a platoon role. They had, at one point, it was Owasso, Young, and a dime back. In 2019, it was really Chuck Clark was the guy who was the dime back then. That platoon was terrific, and it was cheap as heck. And what's more is it's extremely replaceable in terms of injury, because those guys, the specialists, very easy and cheap to replace. And you can even do it on the fly a lot of times, because the street guys can give you 80% of the value your starter might have. And you guys, oftentimes your great dime backs, and Ozzie has a terrific record of getting those, are extremely cheap to find. Anthony Levine and Corey Harris and Haruki Nakamura and Chuck Clark, for that matter. All the guys that they've had, nobody's been higher than a 6th round draft pick.
Yeah, and that's true. And obviously, with the new world of Lamar contract, I think you're going to have to, find ways to do that. And as much as I love Queen, and as I said, as much as I love to have him around, I think of the three, he is certainly the one that goes, is the first to go, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you on that. In terms of Geno Stone, obviously maybe we start with Madubuike, because I think he's the one they really want to make a deal with. I would say so. Yeah. The defensive line, a much harder position to draft for. Obviously, he's having a very extreme year in terms of sacks relative to pressures. He's been a great cleanup guy this year in terms of really benefiting from the zone the Ravens have played, and being a guy who got there second a lot of times, or just had more time to get there first as well. But whatever way you look at it, his pressure rate hasn't been what Aaron Donald's pressure rate has been, or some of the other really tough guys.
Yeah, and I think that's going to factor into his market value. Obviously, all the teams obviously have all these kind of, they watch the film, they have they have all this, the advanced stats and things like that to look at. But 10 plus sacks is hard to, that's just with every sack, every half sack he keeps getting. The price just keeps going up and up. And, the Ravens have been a team, this is our price. This is what we think you're worth. And if you find better, more power to you. And, we'll draft somebody else and go from there.
So in the case of both Queen and Madubuike, and maybe Stone for that matter as well, did the Ravens give those guys we'll call it a somewhat lowball offer to start the bidding at for other teams, just so they could maximize the chance they get a comp pick, or potentially even get the player back at a reasonable price?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, but beauty's in the eye of the beholder when you say low ball, obviously. I think they would give them fair deal, fair offers, but you obviously in free agency, you never know because it just takes one team to blow you out of the water. I mean, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We've seen edge rushers from the Ravens leave, and for huge contracts you never dreamed of, and they turned out to be nothing. And then but then there's the Zadarius Smith who, 5.5 sacks was his top as a Raven, I think, maybe 4.5, and then, when Green Bay signed him for that deal, I mean, I was astonished. More power to him. They were right. He was spectacular for them until he got hurt. So, I mean, that's just one of those things. It just takes one team to do it. But I don't think, I think it was certainly with Queen and Madubuike, there's going to be a market there. I don't think the Ravens need to push the market any. They've certainly occasionally gone for brought guys back we didn't expect they were going to get back. But unfortunately, their history has often been, guys get outbid, or they're willing to get outbid and take that comp pick. Now, you also have to factor in, lack of depth on the defensive line. They did sign Washington back. Of course, he hasn't played up to that deal at this point, so that's a little problematic there. But so you got to factor that in as well. Stone, safeties are easier to replace. You look at Chuck Clark and Geno Stone. Heck, Stone was a 7th round pick who got cut by the Ravens, cut by Houston, and we were lucky enough to get him back. And obviously Clark kind of bounced around a little as a reserve, and parlayed that into a decent contract. So, probably been a little nicer. Stone was a restricted free agent this spring. Would have been nice if they had, gotten him to a 2-year deal, just to have him around for another year, which they've often done with restricted free agents. But you never know. He and his agent might have thought, well, we'll come back to the Ravens for a year, but if it doesn't parlay us into anything, we don't want to hang around as a reserve on a low ball 2-year deal.
So Justice Hill, the big one last year, they right. signed to a 2-year deal like that. Let's talk about some of the other players, because we do need to get through these young producers here. Brandon Stevens, the breakout player probably of this young producer group, just been an unbelievable fixture at right corner mostly for the Ravens, but he's played almost every snap, the most of any defensive player on this team, which boggles the mind relative to how they had him starting at safety, then at slot corner, and then finally decided he was an ugly duckling the whole time. He belonged back on the outside where he played his best ball as a pro. Could not be happier with the way that's worked out.
Oh, absolutely. He's especially with Humphrey having up and down with injuries. It's been fantastic. And he did give up that one chase touchdown. I think it was the first touchdown he gave up all year, but it was a garbage touchdown, and that's a play you're never going to stop Chase on. To be perfectly honest with you, you got to be really, really good to stop that one. But he's been great. Kyle Hamilton's been fantastic. Living up. I know taking a safety at 14 is sort of. A lot of teams won't do that, but I think he certainly lived up to that, and I think he's only getting better. And they can use him in so many different ways.
Yeah, versatility is talked about, but if you really put it together, his versatility is all in one particular direction. He's in, for my money, he is the single best horizontal defender in the entire NFL. If you look at what he can do from that nickel position, I would never move him from there. Not until something changed about his own ability physically that he had to move to some other safety position. Even then, I probably wouldn't do it. There's no way I'd return him to strong safety and play him on the back end of a cover 2, as the Ravens might have done a couple times already this year. Rushes the passer, dives in on run plays, incredible downhill defender, great press defender at the line of scrimmage, looming presence in terms of size, and quarterbacks have to throw over that, and that's difficult. We saw a failure of Watson to do that in terms of 6 points.
And tried.
But it was that play completely designed for a tip ball interception. He wasn't trying to rush the quarterback. He was trying to get directly in that passing line. They tossed a bait out there of Njoku, and Watson went for it and tip and catch. The pass rushing's been outstanding. What he's done in terms of a tackler hasn't really shown up in terms of his total missed tackles, and particularly because he's had some in the backfield that have kind of piled up on him. But when he's going to a wide receiver screen to break that up, there isn't anybody any better. I mean, blocks don't exist.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember which game it was, but I mean, basically drove the blocker right into the receiver. So I can't get around him, but I can overpower this little wide receiver and just muck up the works here.
It's just been great watching him play. I hadn't bought a jersey in a long time, but I just treated myself yesterday. I did buy a Kyle Hamilton jersey.
Nice.
So
awesome.
Yeah, so it's good. It's good timing. I always like to buy in at the beginning of a 5-year deal at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
Adafe Owe, a guy who I'm extremely bullish on in terms of the remainder of the year. Now, I know you're a guy I would come to for this, but it looks like the 5th-year option on him after this year could be extremely cheap, much cheaper than I would expect.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because, and I'm trying to remember the details because I posted them a while back, but for some reason in the 5th-year option rules, an outside linebacker is actually more expensive than a defensive end because all the defensive linemen are grouped together. Mm-hmm. They don't. You would think it would be outside linebacker and defensive end as edges. They never, for some reason, the NFL does not understand the term edge. I don't know because there certainly should be. All linebackers should not be in the franchise tag together. The edges there should be an edge category that have all the pass rushers basically. So it is, and it's projected at this point, but it's a pretty solid at this point, at least pretty decent number. It was around 12 to 14 million, I think.
Yeah, we have 12. I'm seeing 12.871 million out there right now, and I thought it was I thought it was like 7.2 million. Which wouldn't make any sense, but maybe I was looking at a different sort of number.
Yeah, let me see if I can find that tweet because it's probably been about a month ago, but actually I haven't tweeted much recently, so it might be easier to find. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was very reasonable, and part of it was, well, I mean, he's not an early pick, so that made it easier. See if I can find that. But yes, I mean obviously they have to make that decision in May.
While you're looking for that, I'll just go ahead and move on here, and sure. We'll talk about Travis Jones. He came into this year as the only guy they had signed into 2024. So he's obviously very important in terms of the defensive line. It's one of the reasons why Madubuike's value is high. It's one of the reasons why they went out and they signed Washington, where we presumed, and I think correctly so from what we've since heard, that they probably offered a deal to both Washington and Madubuike, hoping to sign one.
I would think so. I mean, they've certainly done that before, and obviously, I mean, Madubuike hadn't hit a stride yet, so to speak. He was certainly solid, but it's a different dynamic now. But in Washington, like I said earlier, hasn't exactly lived up to that deal. But Jones has certainly come on as well. So that's, the question is he more of a Washington or is he more of a Madubuike? And I'm sure that factors into the Ravens' thinking when looking to try to re-sign Madubuike.
Well, I think they're going to get a chance to try it both ways. I mean, with Michael Pierce the rest of the year, he can play some 1, he can play some 3. And it's something I've really wanted to see is just have both those guys on the field on some early downs and see what kind of pass rush you can generate. I know they really do want Pierce on for later downs. Mm-hmm. And they've paired him up with Madubuike. It's a good pass rush combo, but it's amazing how fixed their pass rush 4 is, meaning those 2 are fixed. The other 3 are kind of rotate among themselves for the other 2 edge spots.
Sure.
And they don't play this rush nickel that had been the staple of Ravens defenses for the last, since the beginning of the Martindale era anyway, where they had 3 or more outside linebackers on the field on a lot of those downs. Yeah.
And I mean, it's obviously, and part of that is numbers because, they didn't have Bowser and Ajabo and, so so that they basically have the three quality rushers, I guess, if you want to call it that. So yeah. So over the cap is projecting Oweh's fifth-year option at, you're right, $7.224 million, and that's if he's considered if he's considered an edge. If he's considered an outside linebacker, it's just over 9.018. So yes, very reasonable, and partly because he hasn't. Those will go up if you've made a Pro Bowl, and those go up based on some playing time. So right now, I won't say thanks to injury, I guess, but thanks to injury, that's knocked him out of the playing time. Now, obviously, the more and more snaps he gets towards the end of the year, that could change things.
And this is the case. This is, I believe, the only remaining case, because the pay for performance component that gets you additional money in the fourth year, that's just snap based, and they have some other index they use, which I don't know what it is. It's not
and that's not for first round picks. Mm-hmm. So first round picks, but first round picks do have playing time adjustment. So if he hit the playing time adjustment, that
would increase his fifth year option or his fourth year contract.
No, his fourth year stays the same.
Okay,
his fourth year doesn't change. Yeah. Now, interesting. That's interesting. That's what I had tweeted about a month ago. But now I'm looking at it. Now I'm looking at over the cap, which is where I got it from.
Right.
And they're projecting it at a little under 13, which
12.871 is what I'm looking at.
Yeah, that seems more reasonable to me. But they must have made some adjustment there, and that's the basic. That's without the playing time. If he hits playing time, then it goes up to a little over 14.
If he makes a Pro Bowl, does he get that bump to 14?
Then if the Pro Bowl gets you up to the transition tag, which is projected to be 20. So, but I don't think Oweh's going to a Pro Bowl this year. So,
Ravens fans need to be careful about their voting. It kind of sounds like.
Well, that's true.
This is not Geno Stone's leading in the voting right now, and he's not a fifth-year option candidate. But I remember Patrick Queen was trying to get himself voted in last year, which he wouldn't. He didn't get the fifth-year option picked up anyway, but it wouldn't have. It would have just solidified that fact from having a higher number approaching it. But Oweh, this could be the difference between him being in Baltimore for the rest of his career or not. If the difference between whether or not he makes the Pro Bowl this year.
Yeah, it's certainly a potential there because that's about a almost $6 million bump. Yeah.
Well, anyway, let's certainly hope for the best. Whoever the Ravens lose out of this group, obviously, let's send them off with a ring, and they can mail us back a compensatory pick from their forwarding address.
That's right. That sounds good.
All right. We'll move on. Let's move on to the developmental players, because the Ravens have a fair number on defense, but it's not a really high quality group, in my opinion. It's a very mixed bag of players. And we'll go through the players one at a time. We'll just make a comment each about them, but we got to kind of keep this short. Jalen Armour-Davis, 2 years now in the league. I know there was a lot of babble or buzz, is I guess the correct term, about it in camp.
Well, it turned out to be babble, I think.
It turned out to be babble because the guy is definitely fast and he's got the good size for playing the position, but he cannot find the football to save his life.
No, and he can't stay healthy. So yeah, that's he and according to most of the draft prognosticators, he would have gone higher had it not been for injuries. But maybe there was other things holding him back too. And what was seen on tape in his college wasn't. When you play for that Alabama defense, your defensive line takes a lot of pressure off of you as a corner because you don't have to guard that long. So I think. Yeah, he'll probably be around next year, just unless they draft a couple guys. But he's sliding further and further down the depth chart for sure.
Mm-hmm. All right, the next guy on the list I have is Malik Ham, who is IR DTR, by the way. And I did want to talk a little bit about that. Do you think there's any chance he returns this year?
Well,
without an
yeah, I
injury.
mean, since they DTR'd him, I think they intend to, because there's no reason to not. There's no reason to do that, except to bring him back. Now they get 8 DTRs. He would be 5.
Okay, so here would be the logical argument I'd make. They say we've only used 4. We may as well put Pepe and Ham on the list to come back, because if anybody gets injured now, they can't. There's no way they're coming back by the end of the season, because it's 4-week minimum, right?
Yeah, 4 weeks, but it's also playoffs too. So
okay,
you could, I mean, in theory, you could go out, week 17, go on IR week 17, and you'd be back for the Super Bowl, depending upon whether you get the bye or the like. So I would have to think, but at this point, it's a shot, because they're probably not going to need 3 more.
Right. And they have 5 edges on the current active game day roster, because Harrison is a pure edge at this point. He's not anything more. He's, in fact, had reshaped his body to really play that position. And I don't believe he's played a single snap at inside linebacker this year. So it's all been, he's now at 259 pounds, right, and playing on the outside in the base defense and playing special teams. Valuable player. I want him back, but right, he's not a guy who has any chance of jumping up into that young producer category at this point.
No, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Moving on, Jeremy Lucien is one of the practice squad, by the way, this year, filled with a bunch of 8 to 10 year veterans. It's worse than ever in terms of not being a set of R/1 players that you're really, looking to grow the 2024 roster, a fertile field of young talent there. Right. It's Laquan Treadwell, it's the Josh Wells, it's all of these guys who've been around the league forever, and Adams, and aren't really going to be part of the 24 roster in all likelihood. But Jeremy Lucien is one of the unusual ones. Played very well in the preseason. Extremely smart guy, engineering degree from Connecticut and Vanderbilt. So he did that while playing football. Always impressive. I actually think the Ravens think quite highly of him, and so we'll see how that plays out. But he's one of the very few players who's really a 2024 developmental prospect.
Yeah, for sure. And you can't have enough D-backs, plain and simple. And it's nice to have at least 1 or 2 young ones around that might be able to develop into something, whether it's the next Geno Stone or Chuck Clark or the like.
Yeah, and that's, I think, exactly what they're looking for. Daryl Worley, it will still be available to the Ravens at I guess, a vet minimum price, and there's no reason, I don't think, why they wouldn't try and continue that relationship. But I would think Lucien is the guy who would replace Stone. More than likely would be, Stone will be lost almost certainly. The Ravens, I don't really think they can afford to pay another defensive back who plays safety. I think it makes more sense for them to try and again tap into the value there. And again, without Queen, then they may also be looking for a dime back. So you really want, if you consider Hamilton a safety, you have 4 safeties you may have on the field at some point, and that means you're going to want to have 5 active on game day probably, because you don't want to be without one.
Right.
So it changes the dynamic of what you need to hold on your roster.
Sure.
David Ajabo, how do you peg his career at this point?
I don't know what to think. Obviously, we knew last year was going to be a redshirt year for sure. The fact that actually, I think at the end of the year they did activate him for that 3-week practice period, and maybe they just really did that to get him on the field a little bit. I don't think there was any real intention to, because they did not activate him, right?
They did. They activated him. He got a strip sack in week 18.
That's right. So, that was a pretty quick recovery, and obviously the full off season. Sounded like he had a great training camp, but it just never seemed to come together. He's still clearly raw. He really missing last year really hurt in his development, I think. But as a 2nd round pick, you get 2 good years out of him, considering he lost 1 already. So obviously, hopefully, of course, I don't know what the injury is. I mean, Harbaugh, hasn't really. He's all right, well, they're going to make a decision. I don't think we ever heard what the decision was, and they've never put him on IR. I mean, never. Well, actually, he's on IR. So
he did have surgery, I think. So they did announce that.
Okay.
Yeah,
I missed that. Okay.
So I assume it's some sort of torn Achilles or something that they they took care of, and I may be projecting that because obviously his first injury, that's what it was an Achilles that
yes.
found. So there's two things that come to mind. The first is that he's not in a drastically different position that Paul Kruger was, with the exception. Paul Kruger had one huge interception against the Steelers in his rookie year. He had one sack in his second year, and then he became a very serviceable situational pass rusher. Who had about 15 and a half sacks or so over his last 2 years with the Ravens, which would, at this point from a Jabo, they jump at that kind of a number. But Kruger had at least been practicing that whole time. He wasn't able to make the game day roster very often because he didn't play special teams and the roster was talented and deep and they just couldn't find room for him. But it's not the same. He didn't lose the year developmentally.
Right.
But now Ajabo has really lost a year and a half of his 2 years in the league, maybe.
Yeah. And I think that's like I said, since he was a raw prospect to start with. I mean, obviously the athletic ability is clearly there, but you can win in college on athletic ability a lot. But in the pros, your tackles are a lot different, and so unfortunately that time lost is really going to unfortunately come back and bite him. He might be a guy that wherever he ends up on his second contract, be it here or somewhere else, that's where you're going to get the value out of him. And it's obviously not going to be a huge contract.
Yeah, I would agree. I think somebody will be back. I mean, I guess it's even possible he's the kind of guy who could re-sign. And it really all depends on how he plays in year 4 in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Whether he's a marketable guy like J.K. Dobbins. I think he's got a better chance to play with the Ravens in 24 now than he did at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And now, it looks, he could be back on a 1-year deal. There's one other component of the Ajabo deal that actually relates to Andrew Voorhees this year. And we've had this discussion in the past, and I think, I don't want to restate your opinion. I want you to state it for me because I want to hold you to it, even if it was before. But with Ajabo, they had an opportunity to keep him on NFI for the whole year because his injury happened away from the facility. He hadn't yet been drafted even. And they could have just said, okay, we're drafting you, but we're keeping you on NFI the whole year. And then you'll start your 4 years after that effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this year with Andrew Voorhees, they have the same opportunity. Does their experience with Ajabo, do you think, play into any part of that with Voorhees in terms of saying, look, Voorhees, we know you thought you were a second-round draft pick. We thought you were too. But we drafted in the 7th round. We need to get value out of this pick. You're going to miss the whole year. We got to keep you on NFI the whole year and just bring you back for your first year in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, I think the big difference is Ajabo was potentially a top 10 pick.
Mm-hmm.
And Voorhees was, you said second, but who knows, second, third, day 2, something. So I think there's a vast difference there. So they how to say this the right way, they try to be player friendly, and not play games, so to speak, with these kind of things. Agents will not like that, needless to say. And it would come back to bite them potentially if talks come to a second contract. You held me up, you made me a restricted free agent an extra year. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle it. But I do see a difference between the two.
Okay.
So if they did, I mean, Ajabo first round, top 10 talent, it still went in the second round. Wherever you want to peg Voorhees, even in the second round, he went all the way to the 7th. So now the Ravens can say, hey, look, you got paid this year, because they are paying him some. They're paying him they're paying basically a practice squad salary this year.
So by doing that, they haven't lost anything in terms of
no, because he's still on NFI. Either you can pay him or not on NFI.
Okay.
So from that standpoint, they basically said you could be sitting in college this year not playing at all.
We just lost Brian for a second. I'm sure he'll be back. And here he is.
Sorry.
You could be sitting in college just not playing at all, or
right. Or you can be here, rehabbing with the professionals and getting paid to do it. Because if he's in college, right now, where's he getting drafted this coming May or April? Or does he have to go back to college? Would he go back? I don't know if he had any eligibility left, or does he go, play 24 in college still? So he's going to be playing in the pros in 24. So, I mean, they've certainly, done him a solid in a way and they jump back into the draft to do so, by giving up a future pick. So, I mean, they can make that argument. But at the same time, I just think there's a difference there because the level of talent versus Ajabo is totally different.
Okay.
And so value as well, perhaps.
I'm sorry, say that again.
And the positional value, an edge versus a guard,
And then if you really want to go down the line, the Kari Vedvik thing was a case of did something kind of dumb, was in the wrong place at the wrong time in a way any young man should know better.
Yes.
And definitely any young football player who has a lot to lose should be coached well enough to know better. Yeah. And he got an NFI, and there wasn't even a question about that one in terms of.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Let's keep moving on with some of these developmental guys. Tavius Robinson, been kind of an interesting player this year. He finally got us on the board of the sack. He's played almost 31% of the snaps through these first 12 games. In a lot of ways, his rookie year is starting from a much better point than other players who haven't gotten playing time. And Jones was a guy last year, got 30% of the snaps. I think it really helped him in terms of his development into this year. I feel the same way about Robinson. I think he's got a better chance to be a better player, even though he's really only playing in base defense right now, in the future, based on having this practice time and certainly having this time on the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's been solid. I mean, obviously he's not a premier rusher at this point, but he's a solid player. He seems to play the run well, seems to, when called upon, to set the edge pretty decently. So, I go back to, I had very high hopes for Dalen Hayes, and obviously that didn't work out. But Robinson seems to be, in that mold, that later round draft pick that could develop. And as you said, he's gotten some significant time to hopefully speed that along. And, now he'll get the next off season to work on his body and, get more comfortable with what the Ravens do. So I think that's certainly, the arrow is certainly pointing up for him.
Yeah. Good possibility. By the way,
Aaron Rodgers' season is officially over, but yours has just begun at MyBookie. NFL, college ball, and a brand new cash-out system gives you options to bet and win all season long. First two legs of your parlay hit, cash out early and place another bet, or let it ride for a chance at an even bigger payday. Join us at MyBookie for an entire season filled with daily odd boost, same-game parlays, and huge prize pool contests. Right now, MyBookie has a no-strings-attached cash bonus that lets you deposit and withdraw quick. Use the promo code RAVENS on your first deposit of $50 or more, and you can receive up to $200 in cash instantly credited to your MyBookie account. That's promo code RAVENS to claim your cash bonus now. You can bet anything, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie.
Talking about what happened to Dalen Hayes, and then you look at Malik Ham, Tyus Bowser. The Ravens are cursed at Simon Lambecker. Vince Beagle, a guy who had a little bit of pro experience, could be a guy they brought in, but they all seem to have gotten hurt all at one time. And to me, this makes it all that much more amazing what McDonald's been able to do with this defense without that huge flexibility outside linebacker, which drove a lot of the pass rush in years past.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he's done a fantastic job. Whether we'll be back next year or not, because unfortunately, well, I guess we'll worry about that hopefully in February.
Yeah, well, let's do that. If it'll seem a lot less painful if he gets a Lombardi. We've actually talked a lot about the possibility of a succession plan and whatnot. I think it's fraught with some perils. It sounds great on paper, but it just immediately changes a lot of things about Harbaugh's relationship with the team. Then. And it's kind of like being a lame duck president. As soon as you get nominated for your second term as president, you're kind of a lame duck.
Yeah, for exactly. Yeah.
All right, so let's move on. Trenton Simpson is the next guy. We know very little about this guy as an NFL linebacker. Very, very little. Now, next year, I think we'll find out things, and we may find out not exactly what we thought we were going to find out. They may decide, hey, this is a guy who works well with a dime back. he's a great run and chase player. It's not the guy we want on third field on third down. Or they might find out we need somebody else for 2 downs here because Trenton Simpson's our guy on third down at being in the safety background and whatnot. But, Harbaugh said he was going to be a special teams player, and that's really all he's been this year.
Yeah, I mean, with obviously with Queen and Roquan healthy, thankfully, and with Harrison moving outside, well, actually, I guess that doesn't factor in really. I mean, I don't know who would be the first guy if Queen or Roquan got hurt. Who would be the first guy to step in? Whether they would bring Harrison back in or whether Simpson would get the chance.
I mean, they've had this already come up this year, and it's really been Delshon Phillips who's been in at the
right
position.
Phillips,
so,
right.
Yeah, so they've I don't know at the mic what would happen. By the way, I really don't know at the mic what would happen because they haven't really had that situation occur. Although I guess Simpson has played probably less than 20 snaps a mic to finish up some games so far this year. Let's see. Let's talk about Trace Willing. A guy who has been on the practice squad. The reason he's on this group of the developmental is because he's an R/1 guy. What I know about the guy is not very much at all, other than he's not particularly fast. Mm-hmm. But I don't know what the Ravens are trying to do with him in terms of make him a safety like they are with Jeremy Lucien, or they're trying to keep him at corner. I really don't know what their plan is for him down there.
Yeah, I mean, was he even with them? And he was a guy they signed after preseason during the season. So yeah, he's been on 1 or 2 teams already, I think. So yeah, I mean, he could just be. We got to have a body, and he was available, but they have kept him, so they must. Obviously they shuffle guys on and off the practice squad as time goes. So. And thankfully they haven't had the injuries that they needed to bring him up.
Yeah. So in 22, he played for 3 different practice squads, essentially Tennessee, New Orleans, and San Francisco. So he has been around.
Exactly.
Yes. So it's quite a move.
Yeah.
Ardarius Washington, interesting player. And I think one of the guys that could still develop into something, still only a second-year player, even though this is actually his 3rd season around the team, I'll call it. And I noted that from the Ravens roster, though, that Ravens roster had some funny business going on with the whole Sam Mustipher situation at the beginning of the year. Did we ever figure that out, by the way? I remember asking you because you're the only person who would know.
Yeah. I think if I remember correctly, because I know we had talked about it. Let me take a look. Mustipher is considered, I think he will be, I should pull my own stuff up and stop looking at other people's.
Right, so this is his 4th year in the league. So 20 through 23, but he might have been a draft pick. No, he wasn't. He was a UDFA in 19. So he didn't make the Bears in 2019 that I know of. And yet he was a vested veteran when he got cut in 23, so which I would have thought this was his 4th season. Right. He showed up as a 4th-year play on the roster, and somehow the Ravens were able to cut him as a vested veteran, which means handshake deal, no waiver process. That's the key distinction there. I know you know that, Brian.
Sorry. So
anyway, really a weird situation, but I'd love to. I don't ever remember a resolution coming on that, and I think I put the question into Ryan Mink at one point, and I know I put it into you, and you're the one who would likely know. If anybody would know, you're the one I would expect to know on that.
Yeah. So Darius Washington will be a restricted free agent next year. So he has, because 1 year he spent on injured reserve, which does count towards a year towards free agency.
Okay.
Doesn't give you the bump in salary, but it gives you the year towards free agency. So he should be a restricted free agent because we thought Mustipher would be. Well, actually, that was somebody else. That was somebody else last year. Now I'm thinking about it. But right, we had thought Mustipher was in his 3rd year and therefore could not be cut without going on waivers. Right. Mm-hmm. But it turns out he had that sneaky 4th year, and I'm trying to remember the details of it. I think there was a resolution, but I don't remember that. There was one of the years it he was on injured reserve. Injured reserve always screws up the calculation because you think, oh, that's not really a year on the roster, but it is counted as a year towards free agency.
Okay, so that may be the same situation with the Ravens roster, where Ardarius Washington is showing up as a second-year player. You're saying he's really a third, including his injured reserve year, which makes him a restricted free agent in year 4 next year. And honestly, frankly, means the Sands are much more run out of the hourglass than I had thought, that's obviously the disappointing point.
Right, and I know if the roster says he has 2 accrued seasons at this point, they don't usually update that till the end of the year. So,
no, they updated at the beginning of the year. They in camp, like they list the fourth year players and whatnot. It's your year of whatever you call it, year of service or whatever it is. They have it as 2 for him. And if we're comparing numbers from the same list, we're going down a real nerd alley here, but we're going to do this just because Jalen Armour-Davis is a 2, and he was drafted a year later. Travis Jones is a 2, Charlie Kolar, Isaiah Likely, Tyler Linderbaum, all 2s, and Washington is a 2. Despite the year on injured reserve. So anyway.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll get that. Let me see what Over the Cap has him.
Okay.
Do they have him listed as a well, they have 1, so that would make this year be 2.
Right. That's what the Ravens say it is on their roster anyway. So it would be good. I mean, it would be obviously it'd be preferable.
I could have sworn he came in 20. He was undrafted in 21, and he spent that first year. Wasn't that first year in 21? Well, remember 21. You would get that 20 and 21. You got that extra. You only needed to be on the roster for 1 game to accrue a season towards free agency. That COVID rule. So I would think he had to have accrued a season there.
Let me go find that for you really quick. And we're going to have to jump off this topic in a minute. But he played 7 snaps in 21. And you're probably right.
He actually got, that he got in. He could have been on the 53, which still counts. So,
right.
Let me see.
He might have just been a practice squad elevation that year. It's possible,
but that gets you but that year that's 1 game on the active roster, and that would be enough.
Okay, and it wasn't
actually, Over the Cap has him as an exclusive rights free agent next year.
Okay, well that means he's a 2 this year. It could have also been 22 that he didn't accrue a season because he only had 25 snaps, and he might have done, I guess, all of that by practice squad elevation. So
that's probably possible, yeah.
Okay. Anyway, fascinating stuff. We don't need to go too deep down that rabbit hole, which will keep us here way over our hour per show limit here. The last of the guys we want to talk about is Pepe Williams. Again, I think in a similar situation with Ham, I think they've said we're gonna make him a prophylactic IR DTR guy because if there's an injury, we might want him, but under our current circumstances, we certainly don't need him. And I don't know who he's bumping off the roster if he does return at this point.
Yeah, I mean, and that's certainly a question with some of these guys is who are you going to drop, are you dropping for a different position, and how important is that? I think Williams certainly makes, maybe more than Ham, makes more sense there because we've obviously had cornerback injuries and Marlon's been kind of up and down, so that makes some sense. But he's only got another week, I think.
Right.
Trying to remember when, because they activated Ham. They just activated yesterday or Monday, I guess.
They started his 3-week window. What you mean by activation?
Yes, that's what I mean. Yeah. But Pepe started before the bye, so he's got to be coming up to that. They got to make a decision on him at some point soon. Probably next Monday or Tuesday, I would think, at the latest.
All right, we'll see how that plays out. That'll be interesting. So he might have to, if they get to the end of this period, they could just say, sorry, you're on IR for the whole year. Obviously, I don't know if would need the player's consent at that point to do that, or he hasn't been on any injury reports. So I wonder if they'd look into that.
Anyway, I mean, that's a little tricky because technically you're not supposed to keep guys on IR if they're if they're eligible to come off. Now, so you got to make some decisions. Ham, they might say, well, if we got to got to let him go, we got to let him go. But I think Williams, they see some promise and they wouldn't want to do that. But by then maybe, Armour Davis or somebody like that gets the sneaky, falls down and steps in a pothole in the parking lot. I'm sure there's no potholes in the Ravens parking lot, granted, but
yeah, that could happen. And I think he is at the end of the roster right now. If you're really talking about who's providing value, I think that'd be the guy.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It could be Worley, I guess, if you want, because you probably can move Worley to the practice squad. I don't remember where he is in terms of activation.
2 elevations left, yeah. So that's possible too. I think he has 2 left. Let me check on that. But so Pepe Williams was designated to return on the 21st. So that's 9 days plus our 6 days So he's by what's that going to be, like Monday or Tuesday?
Okay,
they're going to have to make a decision there.
All right, well, that'll be interesting, and I guess that they'll just have to live with whatever it is. Obviously, Pepe in his second year is not such a talent that they couldn't, I guess, risk him to waivers. But I think there probably is a chance he gets taken by somebody. I mean, the Ravens were bold enough to draft him as early as the 4th round. There probably were some other teams who scouted him and liked him then that might be interested in picking up a player like that for the back end of their December cornerback roster.
Well, and teams that are out of it that are looking to next year that might have liked him in the draft, whether they thought 4th round or 5th or whatever. So that's probably the bigger concern is, that's what you always worry about when it comes to December is you guys get on your practice squad getting picked off for the next year. So by those teams, I know Washington did that to us with a couple guys not recently, but 5-6 years ago, it seemed like every December they were picking a guy off of our practice squad.
All right. So that takes care of all the developmental players. And like I said, the common thread running through this seems to be there's just not a lot of really young, outstanding talent. You look at this, I think the best players in the group are probably Lucian, who has potential 4-year value, Ajaba with 2-year value, of a good player, Robinson with still 3 years left to play with the Ravens, and Simpson with 3 years left and at a position of need. And then I guess, you go down to Washington and Williams after that. And honestly, there's not a whole lot of star potential in that group. Not as much as I would like to have in a developmental group.
Yeah, for sure. That kind of goes back to what I mentioned in the beginning last year. The last time we did this, and I guess in the spring, a lot of the developmental guys have now jumped up into the producer category, but I'm not sure that any of these guys are going to follow that. Hopefully Robinson and Jabo and Simpson, but maybe Pepe Williams. But other than that, I don't see a whole lot of nobody to hang your hat on for sure.
Yeah. So let's move on to the veterans playing for market value category. I've got 14 guys in this group. There are a whole lot of free agents in here, a few guys who are signed. Let's start with the guys who are signed because there's really nothing to talk about in terms of these guys. Marlon Humphrey, Roquan Smith, Broderick Washington, Marcus Williams, and that is it. Just those 4. The other guys, the other 10 are all free agents. And it's an interesting group. And some guys, the Ravens, some guys they can probably get back pretty cheap, and other guys are going to have to pay more for. So I'm going to name all the names, and you jump in and pick a guy you think maybe the Ravens ought to try and go out and make a deal for, and what do you think it would cost them? But the 10 guys are Clowney, Darby, Mollett, Delshawn Phillips, Michael Pierce, Kayvon Seymour, Brent Urban, Kyle Van Noy, Daryl Worley, and Rock Ya-Sin.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough list because when you think about it, I mean, they got starting with the 2 edge rushers, you got Clowney and Van Noy late. I mean, Van Noy really late during the season. I'm not sure that can happen. I mean, certainly Clowney seems like he's had a renaissance. But I mean, he's played, he's obviously played well at different spots, at different stops, I should say, before. So those guys, I don't know. I mean, they've gotten guys, Pierre-Paul last year came in and played reasonable, not as well as these two guys, but played reasonably well. And he just signed someplace recently. I mean, signed to a practice squad. So it's one of those funny things that I'm not sure I can figure out how these guys stay on the market so long. And then it seems like when they come to the Ravens, they produce.
Does it seem like the Ravens have tapped into something that's a real opportunity in older edge rushers, a position of tremendous cost? And boy, if there's ever an 80-20 rule that would really help you, it's an edge rusher if you can get that guy at literally 20% of the cost, not just a figurative 20% where it's really 55%. But, getting guys like Clowney and Van Noy, is it something the Ravens say, you know what, we think we can tap that value year after year because we're basically scheme driven and we can do better than the teams that need to have one-on-one winners all the time?
Yeah, and perhaps, and also, if Ajabo can come back and be healthy and start producing, and you have Owe, then you've got a rotation, so you don't need a guy who's going to play 80% of the snaps out there on the edge. So, I think they've been able to do that. Numbers wise, I mean, I would think, Van Noy might be a guy kind of in the Justin Houston mold where you can get him back, in June or July, at a relatively, reasonable price. I think Clowney's price will go up. I mean, what they got Clowney for this year was ridiculous in a way. I mean, I was shocked when the numbers came out. I mean, he got far less than what Houston got did Houston go to Carolina?
Carolina. Yep.
Carolina. So, another name on there, Millette seems like a guy you'd like to keep around. Nothing super, but solid guy.
And do you have to pay more than the vet minimum for him?
Probably a little more, but you're not like you're going to $5 million or something like that. He might be a guy with incentives, $2.5 million, maybe $3 million.
I think that's too high. He had $200,000 guaranteed this year on a vet min contract. I'm gonna bet he could be had for 2 years at a $500,000 premium to the vet min. So
maybe. It's a question whether they want him back, and obviously how he finishes this year out. He came off of a kind of a down year in Pittsburgh. Ideally, he ends this season on an up note. So that may factor in a little bit, but he's not going to break their bank or their budget, and they're not going to do it for him either anyway. But and then, I think probably the most interesting name on the list, Clowney's probably the most interesting, but Michael Pierce is, for having basically not played for 3 years now. He's been, one of the best players on that defensive line. Certainly, I mean, obviously Matabike's, as far as interior, but, and of course, it's one of those things they did at the time, but they took the year off. He was supposed to be under contract for next year at a relatively reasonable price, but as a part of getting him to restructure his deal, take a pay cut because he hadn't played in 3 years. And he played one game last year, or did he get hurt in the second or third game? I think
it was the second game. Yeah.
So, that one can, you could think it was the right thing to do at the time, but it's one of those that comes back and maybe bites you in the butt, because he might, obviously he's got his baggage of being overweight, and even this year I think there was talk he was overweight back in May, but he might get a little bit of a payday there, a little more than we would think.
Okay, so I'm going to start with a couple of things that I think make him a better play for the Ravens than for other teams. The first is that you mentioned is the weight. They list him at 355 pounds. And by the way, the Ravens use their roster in a punitive manner on certain players. So they will list a player's true weight when they're pissed off about his weight. So they put Pierce in there at 355, and they put Ben Cleveland in last year at 370. He showed up way out of shape. So they've done some of that stuff, and they'll let the player play themselves into a better weight the next year. I honestly think with Pierce, they've just said, Okay, well, how you were when you came to camp at almost 400 pounds and you just couldn't move, that's not acceptable. We're not really happy about 355, but you've proven you can play at it right now. I think they just let him ride at 355 pounds, and they stop being completely worried about it. Now, you still have workout bonuses for a player like Pearson. You'd still probably have some sort of per game roster bonus you'd want to give him, right, to guarantee some of his money, but you also give him place time incentives, which is the other side of that, and just pushes that money into 25. I can't even begin to place what they'd have to pay a player like Michael Pierce, who it's not really apparent there's an obvious market for him around the NFL at his age and weight.
Yeah, I mean, and again, they know him better than anybody else, and he's kind of seemed to have obviously thrived here. I mean, it was Minnesota. Well, he was there 1 year, and then the COVID year, and then they cut him. So they weren't particularly happy with him. So I was trying to remember. Is he even 30?
Yeah, he is. Hold on, let me get the roster up here again. Michael Pierce
he's 31. 31. So. Yeah, I mean, so he's starting to get up there for sure, but I mean, this might be his best season of his career.
Yes, it's his most snaps, and in some ways he reminds me of Pernell McPhee coming late in his career to the Ravens, and he'd just been a 15 and 20 snap a year guy the last couple of years before he did, and then all of a sudden, first of all, he's the Ravens' best run defender. He's also the Ravens' best pass rusher, so they need him on the field every snap they possibly can. That's kind of where they are with Pierce right now. He's not a traditional nose tackle, in the sense that you only want him on run downs. He used to be that early in his career. That's what he was. Now he's a pass rusher.
Yeah.
All right. A guy I wanted to talk about was Rock Ya-Sin. Any chance he's back with the Ravens next year?
It's interesting because he seems to be falling down the depth chart. And he was the first veteran to sign. I mean, it seems like Darby's getting more time, and even some of the younger Millette, obviously different roles perhaps, but so yeah, I mean, again, I think he's probably what he got. I think he got like $2.5 million or more, maybe $3 million.
I'm Ronald Darby. Yes, it's something like that. It might be $2.5 million.
I think
I'll look it up. But
so he's probably looking at a vet unless he starts getting a lot of playing time here and shines. I think he's a guy that's looking at a vet minimum deal next year, be that here or somewhere else.
He fits very well here. He's played extremely well. 1.7 million actually this year. So vet minimum doesn't seem unreasonable. I wouldn't think he's older, but I wouldn't think a 2-year deal with a $400,000 premium to the vet min would be bad either, to harvest some special teams value. And boy, you really, really want to have a bullpen for those cornerbacks.
Yeah, well, for sure. Yeah, you'd like the nice mix of veterans and young guys for sure.
Yeah. Let's see. Anybody else we need to talk about here? Brent Urban, I think he's back if he wants to come back on the defensive line. We'll see if the Ravens really have a spot. But a lot of these guys, they're fungible on the outside of the roster, meaning they can be part of handshake deals that create the 3 or 4 or 5 extra roster spots the Ravens like to carry on an annual basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And Urban seems like, even though he left there for a little bit, he seems like a guy that loves Baltimore and fits a good role of a, guy that can give you some decent, some decent number of snaps, but, and you're not, feel too bad when you got to, send somebody, get somebody a breather.
All right. I think we did a good job on the veterans here. How about we move on? Those are the guys who are playing for market value. We got one guy on the team who's a cap value concern. It's an interesting case because his cap is not being, his salary is actually not being paid this year. Is Tyus Bowser, who has I think a $4.5 million base. So basically you're saving $250,000 per week by not paying him.
Yes. Yeah. Each week he started on the cap. He started at the $4.5 million, but each week he's not on, they get a credit for $250,000. And at this rate, it looks like they're going to get the whole amount. Mm-hmm. Not really sure what's going on there. It seems the whole thing seems kind of odd. But it is what it is. And if it continues this way to the end of the year, I would think there's a good chance he's not here next year. It just seems like there's some kind of disconnect going on there. For what, and the fact that they're not paying him, I mean, usually guys on NFI, if they're veterans, you're paying them.
Terrell Suggs.
Yeah, exactly. If they're a guy that's, an integral part of your team, you're usually not going to piss him off unless he's pissed you off. Maybe the right way to put it.
Yeah. So it hasn't seemed like things are right. And one of the things, whenever Harbaugh defers injury talk to the player, first of all, Harbaugh's first thing is don't answer any injury questions. Those are my turf. I don't want you saying anything about injury questions. And I wish Harbaugh himself would in some ways take his own advice, because we both understand legal situations and contracts, but when we acquired companies, one of the things we'd always impress upon the people that are involved in due diligence and other components of acquisition were our only comment must be no comment. So right. It means you can't say anything about it in either direction. Mm-hmm. No, we're not looking at that. They're not part of the equation. No, you can't talk about that. And in Harbaugh's case, he can't talk about, I'm really optimistic about both of them returning this week. His only comment needs to be no comment. I'm not talking about injuries, guys. You can't ask me injury questions.
Right.
And then it wouldn't seem, he wouldn't ever have to be salty with a player like Bowser. It would just be a matter of, I'm sorry, guys, my rule about injury questions, we're not going to talk about them.
Right.
I think Belichick does a pretty good job with that. You already have the list. You guys try and interpret that, I think, is a reasonable way to talk about that. But, Harbaugh's very protective of the information, except when he's giving it away himself. And
right. that's usually telling, because it's a situation he's clearly not happy about. So yeah, for sure. So, and with Bowser, you're looking at $5.5 million in cap savings next year, which is a nice little chunk of change that they're probably going to need, and maybe that gets them enough, cap number for a guy like Madubuike, or as a first year cap number, something like that. So, or at least a good portion of it. If a cap number, a first year deal for Madubuike is like $7.5 million, then you've got most of it there from releasing Bowser.
Now we have to look at Bowser's total contract a little differently. And obviously $5.5 million for the Tyus Bowser of old and $4.5 million this year would have been the bargain of bargains in terms of what he really, gives the team. But also they paid him a big signing bonus. And so that signing bonus for the portion that was prorated into years 3 and 4, it's not dead money for 23 technically, but it effectively is dead money, because they've paid him that a long time ago with a portion prorated to this year, and they didn't get value for that. And the same goes with the 2024 salary. Obviously, if they cut him, they don't accelerate the money. It's due next. It's effectively a cap hit at the beginning of next year. But either way, they eat it at this point. And you made the point that if he stays on NFI the whole year, that his contract does not, I always forget what the direction the word toll goes, but toll means his contract does not advances still to the final year.
Yes, it only tolls if it's the final year. So if this was the final year of his deal, then they'd still have him under contract for next year. But since it's the third of the 4 years, it doesn't toll.
Since you are the brilliant legal mind here, can you take me through the etymology of the word toll and why I should remember it as that's the way it works?
Okay, toll just means that this year didn't happen. If this is the final year of the deal, this year didn't happen, and next year becomes this year. If I said that the right way. Okay.
So do you know what it comes from? Is it from a tolling of a bell or something that the bell has to ring again or something? I'm just trying to understand or come up with some rule in my head.
How the bell tolls for I'm not sure.
It's one thing. Actually, there's two things I've learned in life. I'll be real quick about this. That I was very frustrated about the way I was trying to taught, and my parents always used to correct my grammar because I never really got the use of Victor and me or Victor and I correct. Mm-hmm. And what they had to really tell me was just drop Victor out of the situation. As my brother, drop Victor out of the situation. And if it's I or me, you know that. Well, teach me that way, damn it! Don't just correct my grammar and tell me Victor and I. It's Victor and me in this case. And the other one that just pisses me off like nobody's business is, why do they try and teach kids base numbering system before you learn exponentiation? binary, base 10, base 6, if you want to learn that, is really easy to learn if you understand exponentiation. And it's almost impossible to learn if you try and learn by the people on the island with the 6 fingers. I've never understood why it was taught that way. And now I'm angry retrospectively about it being done that way.
Right.
All right, we'll move on. Transitional players. I have 8 players in this group. I don't see any of these guys as necessarily having any role for the Ravens, but maybe one will at some point. Andrew Adams, who's a veteran safety who's been activated once. Roy Bravion, defensive lineman. Jeremiah Moon has been active. Trayvon Mullen, who's still on that weird NFI designation.
Now his contract did toll, so he will be under contract for the Ravens next year because it was a 1-year deal.
And is it guaranteed too?
No. So that was the weird thing where, what was it? He at the beginning of training camp, he didn't disclose an injury or something. So they cut him and then re-signed him the next day, I think probably as an olive branch to his cousin Lamar. But by re-signing him and putting it back on NFI, it was they basically redshirted him for a year.
Now I didn't realize that color behind it. So they actually cut him, then they re-signed him. And if it wasn't a case of they cut him and he said, "Wait a minute, I'm hurt. You can't cut me." No.
Okay. He let him. I mean, he was on board with it seemingly. And because he could, I have to figure if he had re-signed and they put him right back on NFI and he wasn't expecting that, there would have been a grievance. It was just, and I mean, he was a second round pick.
Was he originally for the Raiders, right?
Round pick. I think he was with the Raiders. I think he was a pretty high pick, or was he somebody before the Raiders? But I think he was a pretty high pick. So he's a guy, he's on this list, but he'll be back next year, and he might be a guy that could turn into something. Who knows? But he's a guy. It's worth a shot.
Okay, very interesting. So, a long corner, and was originally the Oakland Raiders in 2019. Okay, well that's interesting and very good color. I'm glad we had you on. Just that, it's worth it. Rashad Nichols, a defensive lineman. A lot of people thought he maybe could have gotten a chance, maybe even to make the team this year, but no. And I think at this point, he's probably a practice squad guy you keep around and try and get some elevations from, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then Josh Ross is the last guy who's probably the closest to being a possible guy who makes the team, but he is in his second year, right? So the clock started for him and he has a second year of.
He's on the practice squad, right? So yeah, so he doesn't, and he's only been up for one game this year. So yeah, so he would still be considered a second-year player. He was on the roster, though. Was he on the roster last year?
Yeah,
he has one accrued season. Yeah, he has one accrued season, but he's on. So yeah, but he's on the practice squad this year. So he'll still have 2 cheap years, and then potentially a restricted free agent year if he hangs around that long. So there's some dollar value there, as that a cheap dollar value, I guess I should say.
Who would be your guy among these 6 who you think that the Ravens might has the best chance to create a little bit of value for the Ravens?
I mean, I think you're right. I think Nichols is probably the one. Then Ross and Mullen. I think Mullen's kind of that shot in the dark kind of, maybe he turns a corner, and sometimes you need to get off the Raiders.
Mm-hmm.
You need to get away from the bad team and get with a team that has some good culture, and that helps. So but I think Nichols is probably, especially with a lot of free agents on the defensive line, I think there's potential opening there for him if he can put together a good training camp next year.
All right. Very good. Very good. Brian, always a pleasure to talk football with you. Going through this roster evaluation with you is one of the things I look forward to every year. Tell folks where they can talk football and find your work online.
Sure. So on, we'll call it X. I'm still not used to doing that, and I still don't like doing that. But on Twitter/X, I'm at Raven Salary Cap, and then my articles and cap rundowns and the all the numbers are on Russell Street Report, and pretty quiet time for me at this point. Thankfully, hopefully I won't need to write any articles, any preview articles until we get to February. But if something happens before then, my articles come out very quickly, and give a preview of what's to come for the next off season.
It usually, the way I always remember it is basically the day after the season ends, you've got a building the 2024 roster article ready to go.
Usually, I didn't get a chance this time, and this would have been a late bye week. I usually try to use the bye week to, get the framework of it together. But
yep.
But it didn't happen this time, so I'll have to rush it through when I need to. Pull an all-nighter.
Outstanding stuff. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, hit me up. DM's always open on Twitter. You know the rules by now. Really appreciate all the submissions during this bye week. There's still time. I'd love to record some shows, even if they have to go in the can and be come out a couple weeks from now. Anyway, send me a DM. I'll get right back to you. We'll discuss your idea and see if we can mold that into a short discussion topic of 15 to 20 minutes. Brian, thanks again for coming on.
Absolutely. Anytime, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.